actually have a lot of union shirts that I could use for this video, but the thing is that all of them have the names of the unions I work for, and I don't want anyone outside of my work life to know who I work for because you're creepy. No offense. Hi, hello, how's it going? It's Lo. I have exactly 1 hour on the clock to record this video, so I have absolutely no time for diddly-daddling. Today is going to be a short and to-the-point video talking about the Harper Collins Union and the strike that has been going on around the media and a couple of clarifications on what that means. My neighbors are throwing a party and it's such a ruckus, but I really have no more time to record this other than now, so it is what it is. It is what it is. Today, we're here to talk about my job. As you all know, I'm a human rights attorney and a union law attorney in Brazil. And if there's one thing that I've been familiar these past years, these are strikes. Too familiar, might I add. As many of you probably know this already, I lost count of just how many strikes I've been a part of and how many strikes I have organized for and how many strikes I have been in a lot of strikes. To my own detriment. Strikes are something that are very taxing emotionally, and every time that a union of mine is like, we're striking, I cry a little to sleep. Every time. It's been 5 years of this and I've never stopped crying in my sleep. Like, if you want to know despair, try working with a healthcare union during a strike. That's hell. But anyway, this means that I live and breathe a union and I live and breathe in union law. And so when I saw that Harper Collins and now the New York Times as of yesterday, the day that I'm filming, were striking, I was like, this is a great opportunity to make my own personal hell, everyone's personal hell, and talk about union law on my channel. So this is what we're doing today. If you haven't learned about this yet, and if you haven't heard about this yet, Harper Collins Union has been on strike since the 10th of November. If you want the full context for the Harper Collins Union strike, I'm going to leave the link of Justice Owen's video in the description down below. She gives a great overview of just the whole situation, but just to sum things up. Harper Collins Union says that Harper Collins has them working without a contract since their extended contract expired in 2021. Ever since, they have been trying to renegotiate their contracts, but Harper Collins management has not been going to the negotiation meetings, and therefore conversations about a new contract have stalled. And for this reason, Harper Collins has started a strike that started on November 10th, and they have been asking people not to cross the picket line. This is something that you might be seeing if you go around on literally everything. I think every place has been talking about this. Twitter, BookTube, Bookstagram, whatever. But I've been seeing a lot of people who want to support the movement, which is great, but they're kind of like confused about it a little, and they're suggesting boycotts, which...
He's a little confused, but he got the spirit.
The easiest way that I think that for people to understand what is going to help Harper Collins Union and what isn't going to help Harper Collins Union is for us to understand the basic concepts. What is a union? What is collective bargaining? What is a strike? What is a picket line? And I think that those concepts, if they are made easily accessible and they are made easily understandable, will help guide you in your decisions on what to interact and what to not interact, not to cross over the picket line for the Harper Collins Union strike. So today we're going to discuss labor law. Yay! For the FBI agent watching all of this is legal in Brazil. Don't come at me, please. Speaking of, a little disclaimer. I work with unions in Brazil, which means that I'm familiar with labor law in Brazil and union law in Brazil, but I'm also familiar with international instruments that guarantee the right to strike and the right to organize. I've also done comparative studies on union working and union laws, both in Canada and United States, but also in the European Union. So I know a little bit of what I'm talking about here. And also, let me tell you, out of all of this, the US labor legislation is shit. Anyway, I am going to refrain from going into specificities. There are a couple of things that I need to discuss when we're talking about the HC strike, but other than that, I'm not going to focus into specifics. I'm just going to go into the agreed upon general concepts so people can understand exactly what's going on at Harper Collins and in other places that are also striking, such as the railroad workers and such as New York Times and what happens to Starbucks and Kellogg's and whatnot. Today, we're going to discuss unions, strikes, picket lines, how does all of this apply to Harper Collins, and what this means and what can you do as a reader to help improve work conditions at the workplace in Harper Collins and improve publishing as a whole. First thing, what's a union? That is relatively easy to define. A union is a collective of workers waged workers who come together into a single cohesive entity in order to negotiate better terms and a better work environment and better working conditions. Here's a very interesting definition that authors Simon and Beatrice Webb will give to the idea of a union. A trade union, as we understand the term, is a continuous association of wage earners for the purpose of maintaining and improving the conditions of their employment. That's just it. How does a union come to be? What does a union need in order to exist? How come a person can be a part of a union? All of those are specificities that vary from country to country, and so I can't speak of all of them myself. What I will say, though, for instance, in Brazil, in order for a union to be formed, you only need a majority vote of interested parties, so the workers, and the employer can, under no circumstances, interfere in that process. So, yes, that's exactly what you heard. Union busing is illegal in Brazil because we're decent people. Anyway, that's a union. Usually, in most countries, for you to join a union, you vote for it, you create the union, you start paying union dues, which is a percentage of your wages that are taken and given to the union so that the union can finance the work that they do. What is this work? Negotiate better payment conditions. This negotiation of better employment conditions is what we call collective bargaining. Here's a very interesting definition of the US Bureau of Statistics of what collective bargaining is. Collective bargaining is a method whereby representatives, unions, of employees and employers negotiate the conditions of employment, normally resulting in a written contract setting forth the wages, hours, and other conditions to be observed for a stipulated period. So, what is a collective negotiation or a collective bargaining? Is when the employees will sit down with the employer and they will together come to a consensus when it comes to working conditions, such as wages, hours, days off, parenthood, licenses, sick days, sick leave, etc., etc., etc. Another very interesting thing about a collective bargaining is that whatever comes out of that, the contract that comes out of that process, will be legally binding for both parts. So this is what authors Virginia Dolgast and Chiara Benassi say when it comes to collective bargaining. Other scholars have defined collective bargaining more broadly as a process of negotiation, joint decision-making, or joint regulation between groups who represent both employer and employee interests, and which implies a negotiation and continuous application of an agreed set of rules to govern the substantive and procedural terms of the employment relationship. It is distinct from consultation or joint problem solving, in that it results in formal bargain agreements or contracts to which both parties are obliged to adhere during an agreed upon period. So what do we take from this? A union is a collective of workers united with the sole purpose of bettering their working conditions. These workers will negotiate in collective bargaining sessions with their employers these conditions until they reach to a consensus where the workers are relatively contemplated by what is given to them and the employers can actually finance all of that has been asked for the workers. If you're asking me, yes, I've been in the side of both the unions and of the employers in this process. In Brazil, it's much simpler. You have to do this every year, like it's not up to debate. This is a process that, depending on your relationship with your employers and your employees, can be very easy, and this is a process that can be very contentious. One of my least favorite parts of union working, to be quite honest, it's very detailed. There's a lot of stuff that you can and can't do. Just trying to reach a common point and a consensus is very complicated on both sides. So yeah, not my best part, not my favorite part of when it comes to being an attorney, but I've done this before. So the way that it works in Brazil is that you have conventions and you have agreements. Conventions will apply to the entire category, but that's because unions in Brazil have to be by category and not by employer. So you can't have like a Starbucks union in Brazil. Like, if let's put it like this. In Brazil, you can't form a union of Starbucks in Buffalo. You have to form a union of the people who work as baristas in Buffalo. So you work by category. And sometimes that will take more than one employer, and sometimes that will not. And so the conventions are for the entire category, and the agreements are for individual people working in individual places. So again, back to the case of Starbucks in Buffalo. In Brazil, what would happen is that they would have a union for the baristas in all of the city of Buffalo, and then all of the city of Buffalo will have to agree to a set of conventions that would apply for every employer and every employee who is a barista. And then after that, if Starbucks has things that it needs to deal with their own employees, then they will sit together and form a collective agreement. So you can have a collective convention and a collective agreement. Lots of things when it comes to unions in the United States are very weird for me because the majority of it's so illegal in Brazil, it gets me the heebie-jeebies. It's illegal for you to form unions by employer in Brazil. Like, that doesn't exist. You have to form unions by category of workers. Lockouts are forbidden. Union busting is forbidden. The rules for striking are much easier to understand than whatever the hell the United States has going on. So yeah, anyway, this was an interlude on Brazilian labor law. Where were we? So again, a union is a collective of employees who come together to negotiate better working conditions via collective bargaining. So let's pretend that something happens in this collective bargaining, that the employer refuses to come to the table, doesn't fulfill the terms of the bargaining that was set, or refuses to hear what the union has to say and unilaterally decides what the work contract is going to be. What can the workers do then? Precisely, the workers will strike. A strike is nothing more and nothing less than a collective seizing of work by employees. And so the employees will one day do what we call a walkout. And so they will cease to work, cross their arms, not work any longer until management and the company and the employer hears what they have to say, brings them back to the table, or cedes to some of their demands. But here's an interesting thing that we need to understand here, and I don't think that a lot of people are aware of this, that unionizing and striking are human rights. Forbidding workers from unionizing, meddling with processes of unionizing, and trying to get workers to unlawfully stop legal strikes is a violation of human rights. Here's the American Declaration of the Rights of the Man. Article 22. Every person has the right to associate with others to promote, exercise, and protect his legitimate interests of a political, economic, religious, social, cultural, professional, labor union, or other nature. And also, here's the International American Charter for Social Guarantees. Article 26. Workers and employees, without distinction of sex, race, creed, or political ideas, have the right to associate freely for the defense of their respective interests, forming professional associations or trade unions, which may in turn federate amongst themselves. These organizations have the right to enjoy a legal personality and to be duly protected in the exercise of their rights. Their suspension or dissolution cannot be imposed except by the due process of law. Article 27. Workers have the right to strike. The conditions and exercise of such right are regulated by the law. And also, here's the Charter of the Organization of the American States. Article 45. Employers and workers, both rural and urban, have the right to associate themselves freely for the defense and the promotion of their interests, including the right to collective bargaining and the workers' right to strike, and the recognition of the juridical personality of associations and the protection of their freedom and independence, all in accordance with applicable laws. The U.S. ratified that in 1951, by the way, so this is also applicable to the U.S. The International Labor Organization also has two conventions on both the right to organize and the right to strike. That is the Convention 87, Freedom of Association and Protection of the Right to Organize Convention, and Convention 98, which is on the Right to Organize and Collective Bargaining Convention. The US didn't sign those, surprising absolutely no one. The US actually signed jack shit of the International Labor Organization's conventions. For me, it's a miracle that it's even associated with the ILO as it is. But anyway, if you're interested in a video explaining what are those agencies and what ILO does and what some other agencies of international law around the world will do, let me know in the comments. The ILO works great when you live in a country who gives a shit. So when you threaten people to denounce them to ILO, people are like, I don't want to cause a diplomatic incident because my country actually gives a shit. And so that solves many of your issues. I am going to be very honest about that. It does feel good to strike the fear of God onto people. I'm not going to lie. It feels good to do that. Anyway, point is, internationally, the right to organize and the right to strike are guaranteed and given to every single worker. They are recognized and guaranteed as human rights. And sometimes you do have to work and fight to defend your own human rights. And one way to do that is by picketing. Picketing is an act of physically standing in front of the workplace and trying to convince the people going into work to not go to work and join the movement. Usually, when that happens, workplaces will put a line between the entrance of the building and the protesters outside, and that line is known as the picket line. So when people say don't cross the picket line, they're usually saying don't cross into the workplace to go to work and, go against the interests of the strike, join us instead. That was the original terminology and that was the original meaning of the expression. Nowadays, it just means crossing the picket line means going against the interests of the strike. And that doesn't have to be done physically. Like you don't have to cross the picket line physically. You can just do stuff that goes against the interests of the union and the interests of the strike movement. Those are also called crossing the picket line. I will say though that this is kind of an American perspective because in here, I don't remember people asking us to not participate in certain events, not take part in certain services, or not buy certain things. Because, whenever there is a bus strike, the buses just don't appear. When there's a subway strike, the subway cars just don't come. When there is a trash collectors, garbage collectors strike, the garbage just isn't collected. And so it's like it just stops. We don't have to do anything really. So but that again, that only works here because hiring scabs or people who are hired to replace workers on strike is illegal in Brazil. So if you stop production because you're striking, you won't be able to buy a certain product because the product won't be available anyway. So that makes sense in Brazil. And I think that's why no one ever asked me to do it. But supporting a union goes beyond just boycotting. And we're going to talk about this in a second. Okay, so here's what we learned so far in this small class on what is union law. A union is a collective of employees who come together to negotiate via collective bargaining better working conditions with their employer. When the collective bargaining processes are frustrated, the workers will begin a strike, which is a voluntary suspension of work. So they will stop working until management actually hears their demands or complies with their demands. And one way to do it, and one way to call attention to the movement of the strike, is by picketing, which is standing in front of the actual workplace to try to convince people to join their movements and not go back to work. For this reason, because of the line that is traced or held as a rope between the picketers and the actual workplace, to support a union or to not support a strike or not support a strike movement has been called crossing a picket line. So that is what we learned so far. So in that in mind, let's take a look at what happened at Harper Collins. As always, the United States legislation on strike is fucking shit. Not very good. Let's put it like that. Looking at it as a Brazilian attorney is like CLT. Eu nunca critiquei. But anyway, whatever little labor law legislation we can scoop out of the United States corpus of laws and legal directories and jurisprudence and that whole mess that you guys call your legal system, whatever little legislation you can pull out of that will be consolidated in the National Labor Relations Act. This is an act that will clarify and will regulate strikes, workers, and when strikes can be done and when strikes cannot be done. The National Labor Relations Act will divide strikes into legal strikes and illegal strikes. Illegal strikes can be done for many reasons, like per object, per timing, a lot of things. We're focusing on the legal strikes here because they're divided into two groups: the economic strikes and the fair or unjust labor practices strikes. Economic strikes are the strikes that you can imagine are most common. Those are strikes that ask for better wages, better working conditions, better working hours, whatever, you name it. Anything that goes into a work contract that makes it better for an employee is called an economic strike. An unjust or unfair labor practice strike, however, is when the employer causes something or does something that is wrong and creates a grievance with the employees. And so the unions will start a strike movement to force the companies and force the employers to comply with the law. These unfair labor practices are written in Section 8 of the Act. And this is where the Harper Collins Union strike comes in, actually, because it's a strike that is economic, true. They are asking for better wages and better living conditions, but they have actually petitioned to the National Labor Relations Board, and because they see HarperCollins as doing something that is an unfair labor practice. And this unjust labor practice would be the fact that HarperCollins refuses to sit down and talk to workers. This is very clearly an unjust labor practice because according to the NLRA, where it says in its Section 8, it is unfair to refuse to bargain collectively with an employee provided it is the representative of his employee subject to the provisions of Section 9. Section 9 talks about the registration as a union. And this is the argument that they're making. Here's what they're saying. They had a collective agreement that expired in 2021, and they want to make a new agreement to start in 2022. HarperCollins is refusing to sit down in good faith to talk to them about this new collective agreement. And so what they're saying is that this is not only an economic strike, but also an unfair labor relations strike, because HarperCollins has been doing something that is against the law. It cannot, by law, it cannot refuse to sit down and hear what the workers have to say. That is considered an unfair and unjust labor practice. What they're asking for is very reasonable, actually. They are asking for a 5K increase in entrance jobs, which are now 45K entrance positions, more diversity, and better union protections. That's basically nothing. Like, I've done some shit in favor of workers that I'm not necessarily proud of, but that the employers agree to. It's none of my business if their attorneys are not as good as I am, so. But here's exactly what HarperCollins Union had to say. The union is bargaining for higher pay, a greater commitment to diversifying staff, and stronger union protections. Negotiations started in December 2021, and unionized employees have been working without a contract since April 2022. Now, here's what I need you guys to pay attention to, okay? If you say that you want more diverse stories, you have to support this strike. This is a legal strike on the grounds of unfair labor practices. So workers can have enough money to eat without resorting to a second job. If only people who are already comfortable to begin with can join publishing as a career because it pays so little, this has a major impact on the diversity of the team that they're hiring. And if the team that they're hiring to do the purchase of books is not diverse, then that will make the diversity of books suffer. And so that will also make the diversity of the stories that can be bought and can be sold also suffer. And this will harm diversity in reading as a whole. This is why the strike is so important. And this is why this movement is so relevant. And this is why I wanted to make this short or not so short video out of it, because I really want people to understand just how important this is. This is a group of people who are not only fighting for better wages. This is in itself already a very useful and very legitimate concern of the workers. I'm not saying that it isn't, but it isn't just that. Those are people who are concerned with telling stories of people like me. They want people like me to tell those stories. And they are willing to put their jobs on the line in order to get people like me to tell our stories in major platforms and traditional publishing. And I have to respect that. So the bottom line is that I'm standing with the HarperCollins workers, not because I'm a union law attorney, not because I'm a reader, not because I'm a woman of color. It's all that. I'm doing because of all that. But not only. I'm doing this because striking and organizing are fundamental human rights, just as fundamental as telling and reading stories of people like me also is. And look, I know strikes are inconvenient. I really know that you wanted to post that review of Babel because you've been working on it so hard. And I know I also have a review of Babel that I want to put up. But if even RF Kwong is in favor of the strike and of the union to the point where she's actually hosting events in support of the workers, then I guess you and me can take a little chill pill, and I'll post it right now because that's the only thing that they're asking for. Because this is the only thing that the Harper Collins Union is asking for. They're not asking you to boycott the books because this will harm authors. And HarperCollins is an interesting case because it's not like New York Times or Kellogg's or Starbucks where you're just like, oh, I'm not giving them my money. Because if you stop buying books, then you're gonna harm other people who have nothing to do with that, like authors. The importance of this strike in HarperCollins is that HarperCollins has to understand that the community of readers is behind the movement. The community of readers is interested in seeing the demands of the workers in strike being met. And this will create a PR problem for HarperCollins. The PR nightmare will actually push HarperCollins into the negotiation table, which is almost all that the employees want. They want HarperCollins in good faith back at the table so they can negotiate a new contract. This is not too much to ask. And it's also not too much to ask us not to cross the picket line, meaning not to go against the interests of the strike and of the union at this moment, and not post any new reviews and refuse to talk about HarperCollins as a direct correlation of the treatment that it has been giving to workers. So this is a video to explain that for the foreseeable future and until the situation at HarperCollins is resolved, I will not be publicly talking about any books that are published by HarperCollins or in its imprints because I am not going to be crossing the picket line. Again, this is a strike movement that is dedicated to make sure that people like me can tell their stories. And not only that people like me can be heard across the globe, and this is extremely important. I myself have made the rounds a lot of times, again and again, for talking about how diversity is important, but also what are you doing with this diversity? What sort of impact are you having on this diversity and helping those people tell those stories? And I think that this is one of the most beautiful forms of direct action that I've seen since I joined the book community. HarperCollins workers are dedicated to diversity to the point where they're willing to put their jobs on the line for it. And for that, I am extremely grateful. And the least that I can do is not to cross the picket line and refuse to do a review or two that I had been planning to do for a couple of months. I'm not going to be talking about Babel for any time soon. And this has nothing to do with RF Wong. Just like RF Wong asked, I am not crossing the picket line and I'm not talking about books by HarperCollins. So no need to stop reading those books by HarperCollins. That is not what I mean, because again, boycotting will hurt authors and will hurt an industry that is parallel but is not the same industry as HarperCollins is. They don't want to hurt authors. So what they want you to do is to actually pay attention to what they want and what they need you to do, which is refraining from talking and posting reviews about HarperCollins books. That's just it. Anyway, I know it's a bummer. I know it sucks. I know you guys wanted to talk about your books. I know that you guys are here just to, I'm just here to cozy up with my books because books are my entire personality because I'm not like other girls. But as always, and as I've always said, books are an incredible political tool. And I think that the strike at the HarperCollins Union shows us that in the most direct form possible. So the least that we can do is support them. So you can still buy the books, you can still read the books, you don't need to unhaul the books, just refrain from talking about them for a little. It's really not that much to ask. Anyway, to sum it up. 1. Strike is a fundamental human right. Suppressing it is a violation of human rights. 2. If you like diversity in books, you have to support the HarperCollins Union strike. 3. Please, don't boycott books by authors who have published by HarperCollins, and also don't unhaul them. This is not the case where boycotting will be effective. It doesn't work like that in this specific case. Just refrain from talking about them for a little while. 4. Please hold your HarperCollins reviews and blurbs and NetGalley reviews until the workers actually have a contract. Thoughts and prayers to the attorneys of the HarperCollins Union in this difficult time. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Please take care of yourself. Have a glass of wine. Or 5. Anyway, yeah, this was today's video. It was a little different than usual. I hope that I made the issue a little clearer. If you still have a couple of questions, you can leave them in the description below. If you are from HarperCollins management or a conservative trying to dunk on me, thanks for the ad revenue. If you are from the HarperCollins Union and you found this video, stay strong. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for struggling for diversity to this point. Thank you so much for putting your jobs on the line and struggling for diversity to make sure that stories like mine can be told and heard across the globe. It means a lot to see that this commitment to diversity is taken so seriously by the people who work at Harper Collins. If you want to see the full list of references and the digital files for the references that I use, as always, you can check them in my Patreon. The link is in the description down below. Usually I would say that you could buy me a coffee if you like this video on Ko-fi, but instead of doing that, I strongly urge you to support the strike fund. Workers are not paid during the strike, which so they need it as much as you can give. Promise I won't talk about unions anytime soon. I know that this video was a bore. I'm so sorry, but I just have to get this out of my chest. And I'm not going to talk about it anytime soon. But yeah, anyway, this was today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!